at 4:40 in the afternoon, while my father blew out 72 candles. Kettner Creek quietly dropped 8 inches. Nobody saw it happen. 61 people stood in the shade of the live oaks with their paper plates and their phones out, singing to the man who had run this reunion for 30 years. And behind their backs, 40 feet down the gravel bar, the water pulled away from a rock I had been watching for an hour the way you watch a gauge. It left a ring of wet stone in the air, 8 inches of it shining. On a clear afternoon. Under a blue sky. With no rain anywhere a person could point to. I did not scream. I want that on the record, because everything that happened in the next 27 minutes gets told louder every year, and the truth is quieter than any version you will hear at a Weir family table. I stood at the edge of the singing with a slice of sheet cake I never ate, and I looked at that wet ring the way I have looked at readings for most of my life. An engineer does not announce a reading. She confirms it. So I counted thunder I could barely hear, and I watched the water for 1 more minute. And the water told me the rest. Here is what I knew at 4:41 that nobody else at that party knew. A creek that drops before it has any reason to drop is not getting shallower. It is inhaling. What happened after that took 19 minutes, and it ended with a man from the county swift water team standing on high ground asking one question, and the person who answered him was not me. It was my father. 3 words, in a voice I had never heard him use. And to understand those 3 words, and what they cost him, you have to go back to a plastic toy shovel, in a backyard, in 1998. My name is Danielle Weir. Danny since boot camp, because a drill sergeant decided 3 syllables was too many. I am 46 years old, and my right knee still clicks every time the humidity changes, a parting gift from a collapsing pontoon bridge in the spring of 2008. For 16 years I was a combat engineer in the United States Army, Military Occupational Specialty 12 Bravo, which I have learned to translate for civilians in 1 sentence, because the full answer empties a room. We build what the Army needs to cross, and we teach water where it is allowed to go. Bridges over rivers that did not want bridges. Culverts and berms and diversion channels in valleys where a dry gully could become a killing lane in 40 minutes. 2 deployments, and on both of them, the thing that tried hardest to kill Americans was not what you would guess. It was water. Water with a schedule nobody had read. I got very good at reading it. That is the whole resume, and I need you to have it now, at the start, because for 28 years my family has had a shorter version of it. 3 words long, and this is the story of the afternoon the 2 versions finally met. The 3 words were born in my parents' backyard in July of 1998. At the cookout my mother threw before I shipped out. I was 18. I had a bus ticket and a haircut I regretted, and I had made the mistake, earlier that summer, of explaining to my father what a combat engineer actually does, with a library book open on the kitchen table, diagrams and everything. He listened the way he listened to weather reports for towns he did not live in. And at the cookout, in front of 40 relatives, my father stood up, called for quiet, and presented me with a going-away gift, wrapped with a bow. A toy shovel. Plastic, red handle, the kind that comes in a beach bucket set. He held it over his head so the yard could see it. And he said, "For my daughter, the ditch digger," and the yard came apart laughing, and I laughed too. I want to be honest about that. 18 years old, everyone I loved in one backyard, all that laughter pointed at me. And I could not tell you even now how much of my own laugh was real. I took the shovel. I even waved it. Somewhere in a photo album there is a picture of me waving it, and my whole face is doing fine, and fine is a load-bearing word in this family. You should know who my father is before you judge him, because I have had 28 years to work on this, and I still cannot make him simple. Hollis Weir, 72 now. He poured foundations for a living. 40 years of concrete work in the hill country. A man whose own hands built half the garages in 3 counties. He is not a man who mocks work. That is what took me so long to understand. And what made the ditch digger thing feel less like a joke and more like a riddle. My father respects labor the way other men respect scripture. He will pull over on the highway to watch an excavator operate. And this same man, shown his daughter's actual profession, Water control, bridging the mathematics of current and load, looked straight at it and turned it into a beach toy. There was one more thing about him, and I am going to lay it down here and leave it. The way you flag a hazard you will come back to. My father organized a creekside reunion every summer for 30 years. Picked the site, drew the map, ran the show. And in 30 years, I never once saw him go into that water past his knees. A man who camps beside a creek for 3 decades and never swims in it is telling you something. Nobody in our family ever asked what. The name followed me the way names do. Christmases. Funerals. My brother Kurt's wedding in 2009, where my father, giving the toast, worked through the family one by one. Kurt the businessman, cousin Lena the nurse, and got to me in my dress uniform, sergeant first class by then, 2 bridge campaigns behind me, and said, and Danny, well, somebody has to dig the ditches, and lifted his glass, and the reception drank to it. I drank to it. That is the part I want you to sit with, because it is my share of this story and I will not hide it. Every time, I laughed. I clinked the glass. I decided, each time, in the half-second where a person chooses, that correcting him would cost more than it paid. Laughter was cheaper than explaining. I ran that math for 28 years, and the math was right every single time, until the one afternoon it was catastrophically wrong. When I left the army in 2014, I took a job that, I will grant the comedians in my family, did not help my case. I run heavy equipment for the County Public Works Department. Graders, excavators, the 10-ton roller. I cut drainage. I clear culverts before storm season. I rebuild low water crossings after floods eat them. It is honest work that uses maybe 1/10 of what the army taught me. And from the outside, I understand. It looks exactly like the punchline. My father, the concrete man, might have respected it. In a stranger. In his daughter, it was confirmation. See. Ditches. The truth, which nobody asked for, is that I took the job because of what is in the other 9/10. The county sits on the edge of what the weather people call flash flood alley, the most dangerous flood country in America, and somebody who can read water ought to live where the water is worst. I never said that sentence out loud to my family. I am saying it to you now so that someone has heard it. My mother heard it, I think, without me saying it. Ruthie Weir was a 4th-grade teacher with chalk on everything she owned, and she had one habit that I did not know was rare until she was gone. When I called home, from Louisiana, from overseas, from the county barn, my father would ask if I was staying safe, which is a question about him, if you listen to it right. My mother would wait for the phone and ask, "What did you build today?" 4 words. She asked it when I was bridging a river at 2 in the morning, and she asked it when I had spent 9 hours in a culvert with a chainsaw. "What did you build today?" She died in the spring of 2016, fast 10 weeks diagnosis to funeral, and at the reception afterward, in the church basement, my father stood next to me at the coffee urn, and what he said, into his cup, not to my face, was, "She kept every letter you wrote." It is the closest thing to "I see you" that I got from Hollis Weir in 28 years. I filed it. You will notice, by the end of this, that our family files things instead of saying them, and that the afternoon at Kettner Creek was, among other things, a filing cabinet tipping over. Which brings me to the reunion. 30 years. Same weekend in July. Same bend of Kettner Creek. A green half-mile called Cypress Bend that my father found in the 90s and colonized. It is his masterpiece. He mails the maps in June. Hand-drawn. Every family spot marked. The horseshoe pits. The food tables. The generator. All of it laid out like a small deliberate town. He strings my mother's old clothesline between the same 2 oaks every year. For show, since 2016 nobody hangs anything on it. 61 people came this summer. 4 generations of Weirs and the families they married. Plus 2 dogs. Because this year was the 30th reunion and my father's 72nd birthday in one weekend. And Kurt had ordered a cake the size of a truck battery. And somebody had brought a portable speaker. And the creek ran low and clear and friendly past all of it. The way water does when it wants you comfortable. I got there Friday night. Saturday came up blue and hot. No cloud in it. And I want you to hold on to that blue sky. because it is the villain's best trick, and it fooled everyone at Cypress Bend but one. Saturday at Cypress Bend ran the way it has run for 30 years, which is to say, on my father's map. Coolers where the map said coolers. Food tables end to end under the biggest oak, paper plates in a tower, and the creek 40 feet away over a gravel bar, running low and glass clear, little kids in it up to their shins with minnow nets. My father moved through all of it the way a foreman moves through a pour, tapping tent stakes with his boot, stringing my mother's clothesline between the same two oaks, empty the way it has hung empty for 10 years. And I watched him and felt the thing I always feel at these reunions, which is that this place is the only letter my father knows how to write, and all 61 of us are the envelope. I spent the morning being useful, because useful is where I am comfortable. I leveled the grill with a flat rock. I moved the generator downwind. And around noon I got claimed by Bo, my brother Kurt's grandson, 9 years old, a serious child with a cowlick and zero fear of asking questions, who wanted to know if it was true I blew up bridges. Built them, mostly, I said, and that was apparently even better. He followed me the rest of the day like a staff officer. When the first far-off rumble came over the hills around 3, Bo looked up, and I taught him the game my own grandfather taught me. You see the flash, or you hear the front edge of the roll, and you count. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 5 seconds to a mile. We sat on the tailgate with a paper plate of brisket between us and counted a rumble together. 9 Mississippi. 9 seconds. I told him, call it 2 miles, out past the hills where the county line runs. He wrote the number 9 in grease pencil on the back of his paper plate, dead serious, like a range card, and I laughed and let him keep the pencil. And I want you to remember that plate, because it was the first of the plates. And by 5 o'clock the backs of paper plates would be the only paperwork holding this family together. Now I am going to walk you up the ladder of the afternoon one rung at a time, the way it actually came to me, because a flash flood does not announce itself. It files a series of small reports, and it addresses them to whoever is listening. And at Cypress Bend that was an audience of 1. The first report came around 3:50, and it was color. Overhead, blue, hard summer blue. Not a cloud with any ambition in it. But north, upstream over the hills where Kettner Creek comes from, the sky had gone a color I know professionally. Not storm black. A soft yellow gray, like a bruise a week old, sitting low and patient over country you could not see. Here is the sentence I need to give you now. Once, because it is the entire mechanism of this story and most people learn it too late. A flash flood is almost never made of the rain that falls on you. It is made of rain that falls on somebody else, 10-15 miles upstream, and arrives under a clear sky with the sun out, which is why it kills people who checked the weather. The weather above Cypress Bend was perfect. The weather that mattered was 2 counties north, and nobody at that reunion could see it but me, and I could not see it either. I could only read its mail. The second report was Bo's game. Around 4:15 the rumbles came again, still soft, still ignorable, and Bo ran his count and frowned at his plate. 6 Mississippi, he said. It got closer. Aunt Danny. 6 seconds. 9 to 6 in 25 minutes, which is a storm walking toward the top of our watershed at strolling speed, in no hurry, the worst kind. I checked it against my own count, because an engineer confirms, and got 6 and change. And I looked at the creek. Still clear, still full of shin-deep children, and I felt the afternoon change jobs on me. Up to then I had been a guest at my father's birthday. From 4:15 on, I was on shift. The third report floated past at 4:25, and this one you could have seen too, if anyone had taught you. I walked down to the gravel bar to stand in the shallows with my nieces, and coming down the current, spaced out like scouts, were sticks. Fresh ones. Green leaves still on them, leaves that had been on a live tree that morning. And behind the sticks, riding the seams of the current, lines of dirty foam, tan-colored. The kind water whips up when it starts tearing at banks somewhere above you. A creek that has been low and clear all day does not suddenly start delivering fresh green wood and foam. That is not the creek changing its mind. That is the creek receiving freight from upstream, And freight means the water that sent it is already moving, already high, already on the road. I stood in that friendly ankle-deep water with children splashing around my boots. And I smelled it, the last report before the big one. Wet earth. Wet cedar. On a wind that had not one drop of rain in it. Rain you cannot see, arriving as a smell, is rain that has already happened somewhere that matters. I did the arithmetic standing right there, and I will show my work the way I would show it to a lieutenant. Storm top of the watershed, closing. Fresh debris, 60 to 90 minutes of travel behind it, minimum. Foam banks cutting upstream. This bend, a horseshoe with one gravel road out and a low water crossing behind us that goes impassable first. 61 people, spread over 400 yards. A third of them past 60 years old or under 10. Load time for that population, with cooperation, 15 minutes. Without cooperation, God knows. Which meant that whatever was coming, the deciding factor at Cypress Bend was not going to be the water. It was going to be the cooperation, and I had spent 28 years teaching this family exactly how seriously to take me. I tried the easy way first. I want that on the record, because the story this family tells now skips this part. 4:30. I walked to the food tables where Kurt was holding court and said, plainly, storms sitting on our watershed, creeks showing debris. I think we should start moving people up to the road while it's easy. And Kurt, my brother, who is not cruel, who is just a man who has laughed at one joke for 28 years and grown comfortable in it, grinned and said, ladies and gentlemen, the ditch digger has issued a flood warning. And the table laughed, not meanly, warmly even, the way you laugh at the family's running bit. And Aunt Patrice said something about my father's knee in rain, and the conversation closed over it like water over a dropped spoon. 10 years of drills. Deployments. A career built on being listened to when I used that exact tone. And at my family's food table it bounced. I did not argue with the table. Arguing with a table costs minutes. I went and found my father. He was at the horseshoe pits, coaching a grandnephew's throw, and I gave it to him quiet and close. One-on-one, the courtesy version. Dad, look at the sky north of us. Water's dropped and it's sending debris. I've seen this exact page before, and I need you to help me move everybody up the hill. Calm, no drama. Your voice. They'll follow you. And my father, Hollis Weir, 72 years old that very day, looked at the north sky for one full second, and then at the creek full of his great-grandchildren, and then at me. And there was something in his face before the words came, a flicker. Fast, like a man stepping over a crack in a floor he has stepped over so many years he no longer sees it. And then it was gone. And what he said, in front of Kurt, who had trailed me over with his beer, was, we've camped this creek 30 years, Danielle. Sit down. Not Danny. Danielle. My full name. The one he reaches for when he is putting me back in a drawer. And Kurt set his beer down on the rail of the pit, and laughed his easy laugh, and said, she's been in the county drainage business too long. Everything looks like a flood to her. And my father turned back to the grandnephew's throw. And behind me the speaker was playing something with fiddles in it. And 40 feet away Kettner Creek, clear as gin, kept quietly mailing me sticks with green leaves on them. 4:40. They gathered everyone in for the cake. 72 candles, which took 2 people and a windbreak of paper plates to light, and the whole family packed in shoulder to shoulder under the big oak to sing, backs to the water, and I stood at the outside edge of the crowd where I could hold the creek in my eye line, and that is where I was standing. That is the exact geometry of my life at that moment. Family in one eye, water in the other, when the creek pulled away from the flat rock and left 8 inches of wet ring shining in the sun. You know this part. Were you there with me at the beginning? The creek was not getting shallower. Upstream, something enormous had begun holding its breath. Here is the last thing I thought before I moved, and I give it to you unpolished, because it is the closest thing to a philosophy I own. I was not certain. Let me say that louder than the family legend ever does. Standing at 4:41 with cake smoke in the air, I was not certain the flood would come, and certainty was never on the menu. What I knew was the cost on each side of the ledger. If I was wrong, 61 people would grumble up a hill in the heat, and the cake would get eaten late, and the ditch digger would be the punchline of reunions for the next 30 years. If they were wrong, some of the people singing behind me would be in the trees by supper time, and not standing in them. You do not evacuate because you are sure. You evacuate because you cannot afford to be wrong. I set my plate down on the tailgate next to Bo's range card. I walked to the speaker, and I pulled the cord out of the generator, and in the sudden ringing quiet, with 61 faces turning toward me and my father still holding the cake knife, I stepped up onto the bench. I had never used my work voice on my family. 28 years, and it had never once come out of me at a table of weirs, and I think some part of me always knew that the day it did, everything after would be different. I stood on that bench in the ringing quiet with the cake smoke drifting and 61 faces turned up at me, half of them still smiling on reflex, waiting for the punchline. And I gave them the voice I gave river crossings at 2 a.m. Not loud. Loud is panic. Low, flat, and final. The voice that tells the body of the listener that the deciding has already been done somewhere above them, and all that is left is the doing. Family. Eyes on me. There is water coming down this creek, and we are not going to be here when it arrives. Nobody is hurt. Nobody is in trouble. And nobody runs. We are walking, all of us, up to the county road, and we are doing it right now, and here is exactly how. I saw 2 faces from that bench and I have thought about both every day since. My father's, with the knife still in his hand, not angry. Lost. A man standing in the middle of his own map while somebody redrew it. And Kurt's, mouth opening, the joke already loading, and I did not give the joke anywhere to land. I stepped off the bench and started assigning, because here is a thing every sergeant learns. A crowd cannot laugh and follow orders at the same time. Give them tasks faster than they can produce comedy, and the comedy dies of neglect. Minute 1. Pairs. I called it buddy teams, because the words are load-bearing. Every adult took a name, out loud so I could hear the pairings. Lena, you have Aunt Patrice. Ray, you have Grandpa Dell. Every kid under 12 got an adult's hand. Physically, hand in hand. And I made the adults raise the joined hand so I could see them. A field of little arms going up under the oaks like a strange harvest. Nobody drives, I said, and cut off the groan with the reason. The low water crossing floods first. A car in that dip is a coffin with cup holders. We walk, it is 400 yards and uphill, and that is why we are leaving now while it is boring. Minute 3. The count. I grabbed the tower of clean paper plates off the food table, handed a marker to my cousin's wife Dawn, who does payroll for a living and has handwriting like a machine, and told her, 1 plate per family, names on the back. Count them off to me as they start up the trail. Paper plates. Bo's range card had shown me the way an hour before. You use what the terrain gives you, and what a family reunion gives you is paper plates and people who know each other's names. Dawn wrote like the building was on fire and called them off. We're, party of 6. Hutchins, party of 4. And I stacked the finished plates in my left hand like a deck of cards. And that greasy deck became the manifest of my family's lives. And I have kept every plate. Minute 6. The line. Uphill the trail runs single file through cedar. Easy footing dry. Treacherous in a crowd. And old knees were going to slow at the same pinch point where scared people would push. So I went to the 2 oaks and took down my mother's clothesline. 10 years that line has hung empty, strung every June by a man who could not say why he still strung it. And I unclipped it and ran it hand over hand up the pinch of the trail between 2 cedars and a fence post, waist high, 140 feet of it. And I put the old ones and the little ones on it like paratroopers on a static line. Hands on the rope. Walk, do not stop. My mother spent 30 years holding this family together. And I am telling you that on the last Saturday in July she did it one more time, in cotton and nylon, and I do not have one metaphor to add to that. It happened. Her line held them. Minute 8. Communications. The bend has no signal. 1 bar lives at the top of the ridge by the cattle gate. Everyone knows this. It is reunion lore. You walk up there to text your boss. So communications became a task with a name on it. Jonah, Kurt's oldest. 16 all elbows and sweet awkwardness, standing at the edge of things the way 16-year-olds do, waiting for the world to assign him a self. I took him by the shoulder and gave him one. Jonah. You are my runner. Top of the ridge. 1 bar, call 911. Say these words back to me. Flash flood. Cypress Bend on Kettner Creek. 60+ people evacuating to the county road. Need fire and medical staged. He said it back twice. Perfect, eyes huge. And ran, and I watched that kid go up the hill like the message was a torch. And whatever else this family took from that day, Jonah got handed the version of himself I wish somebody had handed me at 16. Minute 10. The holdout. There is one at every site. Ours was Grandpa Dell. 81. My mother's uncle. Lawn chair planted at the water's edge. Who informed his buddy and then me that he had been coming here since Tissen and had never once got his feet wet, and he would finish his beer where he sat. I did not argue the weather with him. You cannot. The sky was blue. The man had 81 years of evidence and I had foam. So I spent 3 sentences, and I am giving them to you because sentences like these are the actual work of a crisis. Dell, I need you to walk with me so Patrice doesn't try to come back down for you and break a hip. Your beer travels. And if I'm wrong, you get 30 years to tell it. He looked at me, and he looked at the creek, and something old and honest passed over his face, the animal part that had already smelled the wet cedar, and he stood up and took my arm and muttered, "Always were your mothers." And we walked, and his beer traveled. Minute 13. My father. I found him at the tables, and this is the part of the story I will tell the most carefully, because the family tells it wrong in both directions. He was not helping and he was not obstructing. He was standing with his hands full of things that did not matter. A roll of paper towels. The cake server. Picking things up and setting them down. A man trying to save a town by tidying it. And when I said, "Dad, we're moving," he looked at the creek and I watched 30 years of a lie he told himself come up behind his eyes and use them. And he said, quietly, the strangest thing. I have to get the map. The map. The hand-drawn one. Taped to the pole by the coolers. 61 names in his handwriting. And I understood something in that second that I did not have time to understand. So I filed it. And I did what you do with a frozen man. Which is never shame him. You give him cargo. Dad. I need the dogs. Bo and Skillet. Both of them. Leashed, up the hill. That is your whole job. Nobody else can wrangle Skillet and you know it. And my father, 72 that day, looked down at the leash I put in his hand like it was the first solid object in a soft world. And he nodded once. And he went and got those dogs. And he took the map too, folded inside his shirt. And I let him. Because a man carrying something he loves uphill is a man walking uphill. And that is all my ledger required. Minute 19. I walked the site last. That is not heroics. That is the job. The engineer clears the bridge. Grills still smoking. 60 folding chairs facing a creek like an audience. The cake with its candles out. One earring somebody would ask about later glinting on a tablecloth. And the water. Dill low. Dill clear. Absolutely silent in a way that water that size should not be. I stood for 3 seconds at the gravel bar, and the creek and I looked at each other like 2 professionals. And then I went up the hill, counting plates against heads the whole climb. And at the top, at the county road, Dawn and I ran the manifest twice. Plate by plate, name by name, and it came out even both times. 61. 2 dogs. 19 minutes. Gate to gate. The knife was still lying on the cake table. Nobody had finished the song. The water came at minute 27. And it came the way I had been taught it comes and had prayed I was wrong about. Sound first. Not a roar. Earlier than the roar there is a hiss, like rain on gravel. Except it is not rain. It is the front edge of the flood shoving the creek's own bed ahead of it. And under the hiss a knock. Deep, irregular. Boulders being walked. 61 people went quiet on that road all at once. The way a church goes quiet. And then it turned the bend. Kettner Creek arrived 11 feet tall, the color of poured concrete, wearing a whole cedar tree sideways like a brooch, and it went through Cypress Bend without slowing down. The food tables went. The chairs went in a white flock. It took the horseshoe pits, the good sand, 30 years of a map, and it pushed my father's parked truck sideways off its tires and folded it against the oaks like cardboard. And the 2 oaks that held my mother's clothesline stood in it up to their shoulders and held. And beside me in the crowd I heard my father make a sound I had never heard a weir make in public. 1 syllable. Cut off, his hand coming up over his mouth. And on my other side Bo, 9 years old, holding his plate with the 9 and the 6 on it, said to nobody. To the water. She counted it right. Nobody cheered when it hit. I have to tell you that, because the version at Thanksgiving now has cheering in it. There was no cheering. There was the water. And there was 61 people learning in one held breath the size of the thing that had been walking toward them while they sang. And the only sound for a long time was the flood itself, working in that silence. The silence of people watching their own funeral get rained out was the first freeze. And no one who stood in it will ever mock a wet ring on a rock again. The county got there fast, because Jonah's call had gone in clean at minute 9. 2 brush trucks, an ambulance, and the swift water team in their bright helmets, rolling up expecting the worst kind of afternoon. And what they found instead was a family standing in ranks on high ground with a teenage runner flagging them in, and a stack of greasy paper plates being run as a manifest. The team lead came up the line. A compact woman about my age with river mud to her knees from some earlier call, taking it in the way professionals take things in. Fast, item by item. The rope on the pinch point. The buddy pairs still holding hands. The old man with the traveled beer. The medic was rechecking Dell and Patrice. And I was standing with Dawn running the plates a 3rd time. Because an engineer confirms. And that is why I did not see the team lead stop in the middle of our people and ask her question to the crowd at large. Who ran this evacuation? And here is the second freeze. The one I did not witness and have had described to me by 11 separate relatives who will never agree on anything else again. 60 heads turned. Not to me. They turned to my father. To Hollis Weir, the founder of the feast. The man whose name is on the map. The man they have turned toward for 30 years for the answer to every question at Cypress Bend. And he was standing at the front of them with a dog leash in each fist and his dead wife's clothesline visible below in the drowned trees. And the whole clan waited, out of pure habit, for the patriarch to speak. He did. My brother Kurt took his cap off before the words came. He says he does not know why. His hand just went up and took it off, the way it does in church. And my father looked at the team lead, and then down the hill at the brown water eating his life's work. And then across all those heads at me, standing with a deck of paper plates fanned in my hand. And my father said, in a voice they tell me was not loud but carried like a reading, the ditch digger did. And he did not smile when he said it, and nobody laughed. And the 3 words that had been a joke for 28 years stood there in the middle of my family, wearing a completely different uniform. The team lead came over to me. She looked at the plates, took the top one, read the names, turned it over, read Bo's numbers, and handed it back like it was a document, which it was. Anything I need to know, she asked, and I gave her the sentence I had been holding for 19 minutes. 61 and 2 dogs. All accounted for. She nodded, slow, and looked down at Cypress Bend, where her afternoon should have been, and said the thing I will keep when I have forgotten everything else about that day. In this county, ma'am, we recover more than we rescue. Today somebody handed us a headcount. Then she keyed her radio and told dispatch to stand the second ambulance down. And that radio call, ordinary procedural, bored even, was the sound of the whole other version of that Saturday, the one that did not happen, being filed away unopened. The family scattered to motels that night, because Cypress Bend was a brown lake with picnic tables in it. And I ended up 30 miles down the highway on a floral bedspread with the paper plates on the nightstand, grease and marker and one small careful 9. 20 hours awake, and I could not close my eyes. Every time I tried, I did not see the flood, which surprised me. I saw the food table at 4:30, heard the warm, roomy laughter with my name inside it, watched the conversation close over my warning like water over a dropped spoon. And I lay there doing at last the accounting I had dodged for 28 years. Here is what I wrote in the ledger, and I am giving it to you straight, without the softeners. My family laughed at 4:30 because I taught them to. Not in one lesson. In hundreds. Every Christmas I clinked the glass. Every reunion I waved the little shovel, took the toast, passed the potatoes, chose the cheap piece, and every single time, I was not just keeping the peace, I was publishing the exchange rate. I was telling every weir in that yard exactly what my knowledge cost to dismiss, which was nothing. One laugh. On the house. I let them laugh for 28 years because laughter was cheaper than explaining. It stopped being cheap at 4:40. Because when the afternoon finally came, the one afternoon my whole strange skill set existed for, I did not spend those 19 minutes fighting the water. The water was honest. I spent them fighting the exchange rate, prying 61 people loose from 3 decades of a joke I had co-signed. And if that storm had walked its last 2 miles even 10 minutes faster, the difference between reunion and funeral would have been the interest on my 28 years of going along. Kurt holds his share of that. My father holds his. I am done pretending I hold none. And then there is the other ledger, the one with my father's name on it. And I have 2 sermons in me about Hollis Weir, and I preach them to myself on alternate hours. The daylight sermon is cold. It says he was told, plainly, privately, by a professional, with the courtesy version, and he chose the joke, in front of Kurt, with his grandchildren shin deep in the water, because being wrong in front of his family cost more than my credibility was worth, and men like that do not get to be retroactively wise just because their daughter was fast. The night sermon is the one that keeps snagging. It replays the half-second before he said sit down. That flicker. A man stepping over a crack in a floor he has stepped over so long he cannot see it. And it replays him frozen among the ruined tables clutching a cake server, saying I have to get the map. Not the truck. Not the coolers. The map with all our names on it. In his handwriting. A man does not save the manifests of his people unless some part of him has always been afraid of losing them. And a man is not afraid of a creek he has camped beside for 30 years, unless the creek took something from him once. I did not have the whole shape of it yet, that night on the floral bedspread. I only had the outline, the way you see a submerged thing from a bridge. But I knew the sermon that was true was not going to be the cold one, and I resented that a little, the way you resent an answer that arrives with homework. Around midnight, my phone lit. The family thread. Photos of the water already becoming legend, and a new post from Kurt, reporting with 7 exclamation points that the team lead had called his sister's evacuation textbook, said the county would want to write it up, maybe train from it. And under that, my father's first word since the hillside, typed at 11:58 at night, on his 72nd birthday. That's my daughter. I looked at those 3 words a long time. A year ago they would have watered something in me that had been dry since 1998. Sitting on that bedspread with the plates at my elbow, what I mostly felt was their weight, and where the weight sat, and it did not sit on me. That's my daughter, posted to 40 relatives at midnight, is a man at a podium. It is pride doing publicity. That one is for him, I said out loud, to the window unit, and I meant it without bitterness, which was new. But underneath it, because I had seen the flicker, because I had watched him carry that map uphill inside his shirt like a man carrying a rescued animal, I let one more sentence into the ledger before I finally slept. He is not proud of me tonight. He is relieved. And he does not know the difference yet, and the relief is 57 years old, and it is not even about me. Finding out what it was about would take one more conversation, in a workshop, with a toy shovel on the wall. And that conversation is the actual end of this story. It was October before I stood in my father's workshop again, dropping off a culvert grate I had welded for his driveway. The place smelled the way it has my whole life, sawdust and bar oil and cold coffee, and I set the grate down, and turned, and stopped. On the pegboard over his bench, where the level and the framing square hang in painted outlines he traced around them 40 years ago, there was a new outline. Traced in pencil, hung on 2 hooks, was a plastic toy shovel with a red handle. And beside it, in a frame he had clearly made himself, walnut mitered clean, was a paper plate. Grease stain in one corner. Marker on the back. Hollis Weir. And after it, one small check mark in my handwriting, the tick I made at the top of the hill when the count came out even. He saw me looking. He did not perform anything, which for a Weir is an act of courage. He picked up his coffee, looked at the shovel like it was a coworker, and said, "People ask about it now. Fellas from the concrete days, the fence guy." And I tell them. He turned the thermos cup in his hands. I tell them I gave that to the smartest person I ever raised, as a joke, and it took 28 years and 11 feet of water to teach me which one of us the joke was on. I did not say anything. A sergeant learns when a man is mid-crossing, and you do not talk to a man mid-crossing. He got the rest of the way over on his own. It came out slow, facing the pegboard, in pieces, like he was reading it off the wall as it arrived. You know I had a brother. I did the way you know furniture, a name on a stone we visited twice a year. Roy Weir, 1952 to 1969, a boy nobody ever spoke about above a certain volume. 17, my father said. I was 15. Netches River, August sandbar we had walked 100 times. He went across for a trot line and the river came up. He stopped. The thermos cup had gone still. It didn't rain on us, Danny. That is the part I could never make anybody understand. The sun was out where we were standing. And then he looked at me, my father, 72 years old, and I watched him arrive somewhere he had been driving toward for 57 years, and his voice came apart one thread. No more, and he said, I strung her clothesline every year. I ran that reunion on that creek for 30 years and I never went in past my knees. And I stood there in July and told my own daughter to sit down. And I have been asking myself since why a man would do that. He set the cup down. 30 years, Danny. 30 years I was proving something to a creek. And when you stood up on that bench, the only thing in my whole body was August. He had not known. That is what I need you to understand. What I understood in that workshop with the great cooling by the door. My father hid it from himself, and paid a boy's grief out in jokes for 3 decades. Small bills. So he would never have to touch the principal. I did not cheat him out of it. I did not hug him. We are not those wares. Maybe we will be. What I did was take the framing square off its hook, and hand it to him, and say the driveway grate needs setting, and we went out and set it together. 2 people who build things, kneeling on the same concrete, and that was the conversation. And it was enough, and some afternoons enough is the whole word. The invitation came in June. Same hand-drawn map, new ground, a bluff site upstream, high over the water, and at the bottom, under the drawn horseshoe pits, a postscript in concrete cracked handwriting. Pick the ground, Danny. 4 words. I have been handed citations with less in them. So this July, the 31st reunion of the Weir family convened on ground I walked first. And on Saturday afternoon I sat on a rock shelf safely above Kettner Creek with Bo and 6 other kids in a row like fence birds. And we read the water together, out loud what the foam says. What fresh sticks mean, how to count a storm's footsteps. And Bo taught the little ones the Mississippi game like a man passing on scripture. The red toy shovel was there too. My father brought it down off the wall himself. And the kids used it all weekend to cut channels in the sandbar. Little diversions. Little berms, teaching water where it is allowed to go, and I sat above them in the shade watching a joke finish its 29-year journey into a tool. And I thought about how some professions look like nothing, look like ditches, look like paperwork, right up until the day they look like everything. The creek ran low and clear and friendly below us, the way water does when it wants you comfortable. We stayed comfortable. And we kept the count anyway, because love, in this family, finally learned to confirm its readings. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. It took a flood to teach my family what I could never explain at a food table, and it took the same flood to teach me that letting people laugh at what you know is not humility. It is a loan, and somebody always ends up paying it back under the worst possible sky. So let me ask you what, Kettner Creek asked the Weirs. Who in your family has a skill everyone laughs at because it looks ordinary? And what would it take for you to hear them the first time, while it is still boring? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, early before the water moves. If this story held you, the like button tells me so, and subscribing means the next one finds you. New stories premiere every week. Take care of yourself, and listen to your quiet ones. I will see you in the next one.